We have 2 pages of the agenda tonight
weren't
with
planning
big,
to go home early.
big fonts.
Yeah, well,
I know.
I said,
The
I
budget
think
book
college
is there,
when we
too.
were 5 years old. I've known to college for 50 years.
More? I had one anyway.
Is this?
I was in college then.
Thank you.
Oh, wow. Proposed budgets.
Don't get old, Steve, and forget to. Too late.
Are you going old school?
No, yeah, thank you, sir.
So, yeah, we've
That's okay.
recommended they
I think, what time were you going, what time were you on Main Street this morning? You on Main Street or on
put out
17th?
not a strictly timed agenda,
No, travel plan, I thought it was you going.
schedule for when we're taking.
Oh wait, is the link embedded in here though?
Is that how you got in?
At least copy paste.
Critical important
I
articles.
pulled my office
between
yesterday, right
7
in my
and
office,
9
right, pretty good.
Am I going too fast?
After 10 or 11.
And the car accident,
Okay,
and
but how do you define critical? Because for some
This
people
looks like-
That's
it's,
up to the moderator to
usually,
figure out.
See,
usually they
that's
give you
so
green light,
vague.
but it must have been, it was just a
Oh, you
regular
pretty
green.
much know which ones
I
are
should
gonna
probably try to go across.
Eh.
I was like, yes, I had a green.
We have
won't be
suggested
great.
that they make time, well, they limit their presentations to 5 minutes each and allow for
Do we have a quorum?
closing.
The audio,
know.
honestly,
Presentation if a valid one is.
All right,
I can.
here he is.
It's gonna come through that,
Hurry up, sir.
which is gonna sound.
You'd be surprised.
Are the
how
mics
many
live?
people in our survey wanted to see
Are the mics live?
3/4
Ready to
of
go?
didn't we go through
yep,
a
yeah, you're ready to go.
real
Right.
bad
Can I just say one
class
quick thing?
Sure.
with all of that?
Just as another quick reminder with ActonTV, just if anybody has a question or a comment, if you could please use the microphone. You're also, it's a wireless one, so you're welcome to bring it to your seat. Just make sure you don't accidentally hit the light on there should be green. As long as the light's green and it's working, and then we can hear.
And it doesn't make sound in this room, right?
No, we do have a speaker set up now, so this time you should be
Oh,
able
so
to.
they'll, okay, thank you.
Great, thank you.
I gotta get you on the email.
Good evening.
Shelf and FinCom.
We're calling to order the
That's
Town of Acton Finance Committee.
Okay.
Tonight we are from Acton TV Studios. What else I have to say? If anybody's, this meeting is being recorded, if anybody's recording this meeting, please let them know to the chair at this time. Hearing none. Public participation. Anybody from the public who wishes to speak? All right, so we move on from there. Our first agenda item is the Minuteman Regional Technical High School. Going over their budget. Any questions from the committee?
You want me to start?
Sure. Exactly. Sorry, I know who's who, what's where.
Introduce
You-
Dr.
I need a lot of support, so I brought them all.
That's fine.
Dr. McMullen is the superintendent of Minuteman Regional Vocational
Thought he
High
wasn't gonna be
School.
here tonight. That's what that's
He honored us with his presence.
Great. Thank you. Last time we had a tour with you when we were at the,
Yeah, that's right. We weren't quite done, though, were we?
no.
Yeah, well, you're welcome back. It's incredible, incredible.
Great.
We have the whole team here tonight.
Excellent.
So Mike has been a consistent presence on our school building committee for a number of years. Seen it from its conception to planning, design, and we're almost done. And I'll talk a little bit about that as I go through the slides. If it's through the chair, if you want me to stop and answer questions as I go, is fine with me, whatever.
That'd be good.
Yep.
Committee members have.
And
Questions to ask?
I'm casting from my phone, which I'm really proud to say that I'm doing that. So you have in front of you the presentation, but on slide 3, we really are, we're talking about managing our success, because we have been very successful, and one of the reasons we feel that way is that on slide 3, you'll see we fulfilled our obligations and expectations. For many years, the member towns of Minuteman had asked for a new regional agreement. Well, in 2016, after a 5-year effort, we, the member town meetings, all 16 at the time, approved a new regional agreement. There was great concern about students from out of the district not paying a capital fee or not paying anything towards a new building. Well, we were successful in getting the Department of Ed to approve a capital fee, which is set each year by the commissioner, and we've been charging that capital fee this current fiscal year, and we'll be applying that capital fee to assessments next year, which you'll see in the budget. The new building is a year ahead of schedule, and we're on budget. We've increased enrollment from our member towns, resulting in really no out-of-district freshmen next year. Enrollment is going to go beyond the design capacity in this fall. You may remember the discussions about what size school should Minuteman be. And we ended up having to do 3 design enrollments for the Mass School Building Authority, one at 435, one at 628, and one at 800. And the one that we were able to get approved was 628. So next fall, we will have approximately 658 students in the building, and we'll have filled it before the end of this year.
What is the capacity?
628.
So it's 620, but you can still go by 30 students?
MSBA formulas ask you to design a school based upon 85% enrollment or utilization.
Okay.
So if you max that out, add 15% to the 628, we're close to 700. Last year we accepted 200 freshmen. This year we're only accepting about 180 freshmen. Next year we'll probably accept 175 freshmen. So we plan to be running the school at around in the high 600s. But as of this moment, we have a waiting list for next year. And that waiting list includes member town.
Interject that
Go ahead, Mike.
many of the member communities didn't think this was ever possible.
Right.
So congratulations.
Thanks, Mike. So we fulfilled that. We've done everything you've asked us to do. Slide 4 is a graphic of the enrollment over the last few years. Belmont is no longer a member after July 1st, 2020. So their students are included in that yellow bar as a withdrawing town. The FY21 budget on, oh, I can do this too, jeez. The FY21 budget is up about 6.5% over this year's budget. The debt service is up significantly over this year's budget. Debt service for the new building is up about 47% over last year. That's in due large part, we went to our 3rd round of borrowing. We have one more small round left, which we'll do towards the end of the project. But the full cost of the debt service is hitting the towns, the 9 remaining member towns. On page 6, you'll see some of the major increases. Technology, we have a 1-to-1 laptop program. With the increase in students, we have to increase the number of devices available. Transportation, even though it may be counterintuitive, transportation, we've accommodated an increase, a fairly substantial increase, because of what we've heard from other superintendents and school districts, that the new regulations, or I don't know if it's a law, require that that category of bus driver needs to be offered health insurance, and that health insurance is being shared with the employer, so the costs of employees in the transportation world is going up significantly, is what we're planning for. We have an RFP. We're in the process of getting a new bus contract, and we expect to have in March the results of that. So we'll know if that number is right or not. We hired a great consultant who's helped improve the competitive floor. Our experience has been that we rarely get more than one bid for a transportation contract, and this year we believe we will have 2, perhaps 3. So we're looking forward to seeing that. Athletic services are up because we have no home fields. We've got a beautiful home gymnasium, which we're opening state championship tomorrow. Minuteman's in it. So we're having to rent fields away. Health insurance, we're in a health trust. We're assuming about an 8% increase. And you can see the prior borrowing is about $1 million increase, and then our new 3rd round of borrowing is another $400,000 added to the previous borrowing. We're in negotiations with the Teachers Association. We're at the end of a 3-year contract. We expect to wrap up those negotiations in a few weeks, and so we've tried to accommodate for that. And I have to put this in, but based upon Belmont's departure, Acton's assessment is going to go up $150,000 just based on that. The The assessment, the total assessment there of 1.7 million is broken down based upon these variables which are described in the regional agreement. The minimum required contribution, the operating assessment. There also are some choice students. Those were students that went to another vocational technical school because we didn't have the program that they were seeking. And you'll see the debt service, although it's excluded, I guess you recently voted the exclusion of that debt. It's $335,000. That increase of $277,000 is broken down a little bit more in detail. The operating and transportation budget is the bulk of that increase for Acton, and the increase in project debt is about $44,000. Slide 9 is just sort of a reiteration of slide 3. It's sort of the new normal. Full member enrollment, waiting list for members. We've already gotten phone calls. We sent out in the first wave of offering enrollment, we sent out 175 offers of enrollment to member district students. And I guess they talked to each other, and we got phone calls, well, why didn't my child get offered enrollment? And we explained that we have a second round that'll happen in a couple of weeks. Once we know what communities have utilized their minimum slot allocation and which towns haven't, and we take those excess slots and apply them to the rest of the member district applications. Then we get through all that around the 1st of March, and if there are any slots available, which we don't know if there are, there probably are not, then we'd go to out-of-district applications and simply take the highest ranking application down. But I should mention we've had over 300 applications for 180 positions, over 200 applications just from the 9 remaining member towns for 180 slots. On page 10, this year we felt it was important to try to project enrollment for next fall. A lot of finance committees are asking us, when does the full borrowing hit the budget? Are you going to see big increases now that your school is full? So we've borrowed a little bit more than 90% of what we're going to borrow, so we don't expect big increases like this to happen again when it comes to the capital. Our operating is pretty much close to full after this budget is passed and implemented, so we don't expect large increases operating or capital after this year. And the other thing that moderates any kind of increase in assessment is the new regional agreement, which uses a 4-year rolling average. And in Acton's case in particular, you'll see right now there are 36 Acton students. We're projecting that there are going to be over 60 Acton students next year based upon the following page. We've had 46 applicants, 8th grade applicants from Acton this year. 46. You do that times 4, that's 200 kids from Acton coming to Minuteman. So we've offered 29 of those 46 were offered admission in the first round that I mentioned, and 18 have already committed to come. There are another 11 who have another week or two to let us know. And then 15 are finalizing their applications, and they're still in the process. They could possibly be admitted in the second wave if there are towns that haven't used their allocation. So there's been a real shift in how families view Minuteman, and I'm really pleased with that. It's a challenge financially, but I think we have things in place to moderate those challenges. And I think we're in the worst of it this coming fiscal year. Slide 12 talks about the budget history. I thought it was important to remind us that in FY 17 and 18, we cut the budget almost $2 million, real dollars. in an effort to right-size the building. During that period of time, we were going through a really hard dip in enrollment. I think part of it was some of the controversy that was swirling out there. And now, as we move forward, we're trying to right-size the building, and I think we'll be mostly there. We're adding staff because of the increase in enrollment, but we're also adding staff because we started 2 new programs last year, 2 years ago, I should say. We're going to be in the 3rd year of advanced manufacturing, and then we're going to be in the 3rd year of multimedia engineering. So we need to hire another teacher in multimedia engineering, and we're starting a new program, veterinary assisting, which starts this fall. Been approved by the Department of Ed, and we already have a tremendous amount of interest in that program. So there are some challenges going forward with the withdrawal of towns. Means that obviously the remaining towns are taking that hit. With little or no out-of-district enrollment, within 4 years we're going to have no revenue from out-of-district to apply towards reducing the assessments to member towns. And unfortunately we're going to be in the position of having waiting lists for member district students. I always thought this would happen, but I never thought it would happen in a year. So we're managing our success, and it's going to be a challenge going forward. Page 14 is something we use every year, our revenue plan. You'll notice that there's a non-resident capital fee row under non-assessment revenue. I really think that should say prior year capital fee, and then we'll add another line saying current year capital fee. But you can see this year we've collected $900,000, a little more than that, and we've committed almost all of that to simply reducing the member district assessments. Our finance committee and our school committee are talking about how do we best utilize that capital fee, because we know in 4 years we're probably not going to have it. Are there things we're experiencing in the building that need to be addressed rather than go out and borrow more money? Can we effectively and responsibly apply that capital fee? You know, we have some programs that have waiting lists in them because when we designed the building, for instance, metal fabrication and welding and advanced manufacturing, we had to turn away about 12 freshmen this year. We had 20 freshmen wanting to get into welding and metal fab because the shop was sized at the time to what we thought would be the enrollment. We could only take 8 freshmen in there. 6 of them are girls, too. Advanced manufacturing has kind of been pushed into an end of the shop, and we were limiting our enrollment there, too. And those are high-paying jobs, very high-paying jobs. So we need to look at how do we expand that capacity in those programs. Managing our success, we never imagined that many, that high an interest level, and the governor's been great about helping us equip all that. So it's state-of-the-art equipment in all those programs. And page 15 is just another, that's your assessment. Any questions?
Looking at the operating assessment and transportation and capital, how many of these change based on enrollment? I presume the minimum required contribution doesn't change.
That'll catch up in the next cycle of Chapter 78. So our bump in enrollment this year, there's some impact of that on these numbers, absolutely. But I think we're going to see even a bigger one next for FY22.
Okay. So those are based on, I'm assuming minimum required contribution is nothing to do with the number of students. If we had no students going, we would still be required.
No, it's based upon the,
That is, so all of these are based on enrollment?
yes.
Okay.
There's some portion of it that's based on enrollment. Like our debt and capital assessment is from our regional agreement.
Yeah.
So there's a different formula for that. And half of that assessment is based upon enrollment, the other half is based on other factors.
Okay.
Anything else? Steve?
Sure, so as a percentage of total assessment, what, is it based on a 4-year average enrollment?
How is Acton's assessment
Yeah.
calculated?
Anybody's assessment, it's based on the same formula, right?
Yes, everybody's assessment is based on the same formula. The operating assessment is a little different than the capital assessment. And Bob's waving his hand. Bob Girardi is the Director of Finance for Minuteman.
Hey, Bob.
So it kind of links back to the last
So
question.
sorry, could you speak into the microphone for us?
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. This kind of links back, hi, Bob Girardi, Finance Director. And this links back also to the last question, which is the state's minimum foundation budget and minimum foundation enrollment did factor into your increase significantly in the operating budget this year. The debt and other calculations are based on a 4-year rolling average, which Dr. B was talking about as far as the regional agreement. That softens the blow of the increase. So there is some correlation to the increase in operating budget and the increase in your budget. And then when you look at debt, though, it's very closely related to our overall increase. You only increased about 12%. Overall, we increased about 13%. So it's that minimum foundation enrollment that we talked about when I came to the ALG meeting that had the impact on your budget. And also, Dr. B kind of went over it on slide 6, but the fact that Belmont left, your budget is increasing by $277,000 this year. But if Belmont hadn't left, it would have only increased by $127,000. That's the really big impact this year for Acton. The fact that Belmont left, and they're not one of the member districts right now.
So you
So I
can
don't
send
know if
them
that
a
helps.
card.
What's that?
They can send them a card.
So I don't know if that helped answer the question, but it
Well,
does.
so what 4 years are we averaging?
The previous 4.
The previous 4, always in the formula.
So, looking at page 10, then the previous 4 for Acton are 35, 30, 33, 35, 35, 30.
Yeah, it's about 34.5 is your rolling
And the big
average.
increase is not part of the equation because it hasn't happened yet, right?
The biggest increase hasn't happened yet, but the effect of the state enrollment and the state minimum foundation. The state minimum foundation went up from $1,700 per student roughly to almost $20,000 per student. That has a big impact on a community like Acton, because you're at the higher end of the minimum contribution because of your relative wealth, and so it impacted you significantly.
Well, we won't be wealthy for very long if this keeps up. So next year could be even worse, because just glancing at your numbers, we've got the biggest increase in enrollment
Potentially.
in the school on a projected basis.
Potentially.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions? Adam?
No, I only have a remark to make, which is that I just, on a cost per student basis, I'm just a little bit surprised by the numbers, I think. And I'm a new FinCom member, so I don't really have any specific comment to make. But as a parent, and my son also looked into Minuteman, and we loved it,
Great.
I will say. But I think the cost per student seems very high to me, is the only comment I have to make. At $48,000 per student. That's all.
Well, when you have a vocational education that uses state-of-the-art equipment, and you have a lot of students need special education plans, and it's expensive.
But
You
I-
can't. It's not the same as regular public school financing. The rooms are different. The population is different. The equipment is different.
But the special education, I think, raises an interesting point, because a lot of what doesn't show up, I think, totally put you on the spot over there, Diane. In the cost per student in district, does that include the cost for the kids who have the special education plans? That standard number we see? Because I would think with a population that has a higher percentage, of kids who need plans, that you would have a higher cost per student.
I can speak a little bit to that too, if you'd like.
Can I answer or no?
Oh, go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see you.
Okay, I wasn't sure if you wanted me to actually accept. So it does include that, it doesn't include special ed transportation, capital, but it does include special education. I'm almost 100% sure that it does.
Now, I know we have a few students who are especially expensive because of the, I'm sorry, that sounds wrong, that there are a few situations that cost a lot more than others. Is that then spread across the entire population in terms of the, I think it's 15,000 ballpark now per kid?
Yes, well, it goes into the total budget for,
Okay.
for special education tuitions, and and it is my understanding that that does get calculated when they figure out what the cost per pupil. There's a lot of numbers that go in there into that equation. I did have a quick question about
Sure.
class size at Minuteman.
Yep.
I haven't looked at all voc texts, but I have noticed that your class sizes seem to be smaller than
Mhm.
most others, and if that was figuring into the per pupil.
It has in the past contributed to, I think, an unsustainably high per pupil cost. And if we look at other regional vocational schools, their class student-teacher ratio is around 10 to 12 to 1. Minuteman's has been more, I think the lowest we got was 8 to 1. This year, I think we're about 9.5 to 1. And if we project forward, we're going to be more like the other vocational schools going forward. But one thing it is distinctive about Minuteman that the other vocational schools, the only one that comes close to us is Keefe Tech. 48% of our kids are on IEPs. 48%. That's the highest in the Commonwealth. And so we have a large special ed staff. We have a lot of support services that we provide within the school. Circuit breaker doesn't apply to us. And we provide all the transportation as well as the regular ed transportation. So that's all baked into those numbers. And the other thing that I'll say is that, we carry 2 staffs. We carry a full academic staff with guidance counselors and special ed folks. We carry a full complement of vocational technical teachers, many of whom we've had to hire directly out of industry and business. So their salaries are, reflect that. I think Minuteman's salaries are the 9th highest in the state when you look at it overall. And our district, even though there's only 9 towns now, geographically it's still almost 40 miles east and west. So our transportation costs per pupil are a little bit higher than other vocational schools as well.
I'm sorry for cutting you off there, Mike. I'm sorry for interrupting you.
No, I'm good, I'm good.
Just curious, Ed, why does the circuit breaker apply to you?
We never hit that threshold. When we probably, I don't know of any vocational school that calculates the costs in a way to actually try to hit the threshold. We haven't had the need to do that.
Okay.
Do you have a sense for what the cost per pupil is for most of the towns?
Most of our member towns,
Yes.
on an apples to apples basis, it's somewhere between, well, if you take Belmont, which is gone, but somewhere between 16 and 22,000 per pupil. Because I was just in Stowe earlier this evening and they were using the 22,000 per pupil.
The only thing is the other numbers don't include debt.
Yeah, I was gonna say that. We're looking at more like 48,000, but that's because we take debt into account.
Yeah, so, great point. The number you're looking at includes debt, but your schools don't include debt in their per pupil cost.
Thank you, that was one of my questions. Is
Yeah.
that the case? So the 15,000 does not include our debt?
So that changes things, thank
That
you.
Correct.
That
Yeah.
changes a
That's
lot.
correct,
That
yeah.
makes it much more appealing.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yes.
And nationwide, the last studies I read said that career tech ed, like offered at Minuteman, is about 50% more expensive than a traditional comprehensive high school. And I think we're approaching that metric in FY21 budget when you look at FY21 enrollment.
Can you go back to slide 10? I do have a couple questions on slide 10.
Yep.
If you look at the towns on FY21 that are in white,
Yes.
so like Foxborough, they're not part of the district even though
Mm-hmm.
we're AD, Carlisle, et cetera. Are those the number of students that are gonna be in the school from those towns that are, so like they're not freshmen this year or they're freshmen this year?
Correct. They're sophomores or juniors or.
And so eventually that, if it just stays just with the district, and those other towns are gone, eventually they will be out of those numbers.
Yep. That's correct. Tragic.
Have you had any interest from towns that left the district?
There have been, well, I guess you'd have to define who the town is.
Okay.
If you talk, if I talk to parents and
Yeah.
community leaders and stuff, yeah, there's a lot of angst about not having access to Minuteman. Has anyone done anything to actually get back into the district? No. I don't think anyone ever anticipated the success that we're having. And we're in Lincoln. Lincoln's not even a member.
Right.
So what would be the process if a town wanted to get back in? Do the other remaining members of those towns would have to okay that to happen?
Yeah, the regional agreement spells it out. If the governing body of the town, in most cases a town meeting, there'd have to be a warrant article which have to go through all that process, and the town meeting would vote upon it. And then the school committee, the Minuteman School Committee, would either accept or reject that vote. If the Minuteman School Committee accepted it, then it would have to go to all the towns for approval. And I think it's just a majority of the towns would have to approve it. And it takes a couple of years. And
So those towns that left are now kicking themselves at, hey,
well, you'd have to
They're
ask
doing
them
good.
what they're kicking. They were kicking me for quite a while. Ooh, I'm on TV.
are there any other questions from committee? Thank you. That's that? Thank you.
I would just like to suggest if any of the FinCom members or anyone else would want to see where your money goes, it's well worth taking a tour of the new Minuteman School, and
Come for
I
lunch.
think you'll be very impressed.
And full disclosure, my son will be starting there next year.
All right. Did he get his letter?
He already accepted.
Awesome. That's good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very informative. Appreciate that. We may be contacting you for another tour in the future.
Sure. Tuesday, Wednesdays, Thursdays, or Fridays at the restaurant.
Oh, that must be
And then
good.
11, I'll give you a tour, and then we can go have lunch.
Ever gained 10 pounds?
I was impressed with it. Yeah, and it's still under construction, so I can just manually. What's your name, Cindy? Computers?
Computers, yeah,
I don't know how to get to this.
Do you know
He
what's
and, surprisingly enough, he and 4 other classmates from McMullen town are all accepted and going.
So I, this is a new
It's kind of an interesting draw there. Yeah.
At Adamstown on 10 too.
It's a beautiful building. We were really impressed with the staff that we met.
Yeah.
It was really nice.
Your son is going there too?
He decided not to because he didn't like that they're 1 week academic and 1 week
Oh, my son
other.
loved that.
And he didn't like that idea.
that's
He
funny.
wanted, he's set in his way, I guess.
There you go.
Oh, we gotta get off.
I was surprised because he was really excited about it right up until he found out that that's the way they do it.
Trend continues,
Okay, so our next agenda item is capital needs presentation from our
all over the place.
town manager.
And it mitigates the increase.
Hello,
Even John.
thanks for inviting me back. Some select board members are here with us tonight. Members of the staff are here to also be responsive to any questions that you all have about capital. So I was asked to come in here and talk about our 5-year plan that was in the town manager's budget, which actually I printed out for all of you so you can, so it'll be a little bit hard to read on the screen. So the first thing I'd like to do is walk through that 5-year plan and just give you a chance to get a closer look at it, because it's a lot of numbers. And
Exactly.
so the sheet that I just passed out directly aligns with the FY21 revised capital plan that's shown on the screen. There is 450,700 items that are included in the operating budget that are considered capital. There are, if you look at the next category, it's free cash. There's 740,000 in free cash projects. There's 1.8 million in borrowing proposed, and there's 575,000 in special revenue funds proposed for appropriation for various needs. When you add up all those items, the cost is 3.5 million. The total that you see here on the bottom actually includes the fire station, which it shouldn't, because that's already been approved. But just so you know. So just to walk you through some of these projects to give you a sense of what they are. As you can see, just if we go back to general fund, in FY21 there was 2.2 million in requests, and we were able to fund 450,000. So we're doing 30,000 of new flooring in town hall, which is replacing the old carpet with a modern tile that's much easier for maintenance. And we're gonna hope to do that over 2 years. There are several projects that we are going to fund through other means. An example of that would be stand-up desks, where we think we can go after some grant money to start to put more of those into town hall as a wellness initiative.
Are those the desks that go up and down?
Yeah, we have a few, but people really find them to help, especially on long days like Tuesday, to sort of give them an opportunity to stand for part of the day.
We have a couple of those more and more in our office, and people do stand up periodically to stand.
Yeah, it's a standing. It gives you the choice. You can also sit if you want to sit. So they're very nice options for people. So we'd like to try to put more in the building. Other items that we didn't fund this year, but we hope to do in the future, are resurfacing the Elm Street courts, tennis courts, the narrow boardwalk and bridge. We're going to put in a CPC application in the future for that. The narrow sports pavilion, CPC, I believe, is recommending an appropriation for this of, I believe, 200,000. So we're pleased that we'll get some assistance from that if town meeting supports it. Same thing with East Acton Village Green. They're supporting with that, I believe, as well. The next item is we need to do some design work on the existing HVAC system at the public safety facility. Even though it looks like a new building, it still needs some, we need to plan for some replacements to that system, and this is design work to start that process.
What year was that building completed?
04.
So the life expectancy of a HVAC system is
20 years.
20 years. So.
It's not, yeah, I mean, it's not gone, but we want to plan to replace it before it dies. Other items are, fleet replacement. We're gonna look to do some of that more next year. Complete streets and intersections. That's something that we're funding through free cash, which I'll talk about shortly.
Sean, can I back you up one about
Sure.
that? Asset management? What is that?
This was a request to purchase a software system and also do some data collection to put all of our infrastructure assets into this big asset management system, which is a good project. It's public works assets.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not something that we were able to prioritize
Is that
this
like
year.
equipment of?
Catch basins, curbs, sidewalk widths. We have some of the information, but it would be taking all of the information. The roadway conditions, all the different things that we maintain out in the public infrastructure, putting it into this big system. And then it'll allow us to do more planning and budgeting, but it's an expensive upfront cost, so we weren't able to do it this year.
Thank you.
The IT items are related to just replacing switches and infrastructure that we do every year. We reduced that a little bit this year to try to make room for some other things. Same thing, the police motor vehicle, as I mentioned, the fleet replacement program that the police has proposed to transition to a hybrid fleet. They proposed to do 5 this year. We were only able to fund 3 or 4. And what we have a supplement to that in the sustainability policy implementation that I'll get to shortly out of free cash. The next items are related to the road work and maintenance that Corey leads, Director Corey York leads out in the Public Works realm. Paving of streets, paving of sidewalks, replacing equipment. You'll see that these numbers are slightly lower than requested, and that's partly because we're proposing some big capital projects from borrowing and free cash to do some related work.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
On that list, what is vacant storefront program?
So that is a program that Selby and I have been, Land Use and Economic Development Director Selby has been, we've been talking about ways to try to help our businesses who, as you know, there's a lot of vacancy in the community. And there are some state programs that provide sort of rent relief to new businesses that come into a vacant storefront, but the program requires a local match. So this would be a way to provide that. However, there are some logistics and regulations and authorizations that we weren't able to figure out for this budget cycle, but we're gonna continue to look at that as an idea going forward. So for example, if we had a program and they funded 20,000, we would have to match it with another 20. So that's why we need to do more work on it and hopefully bring it back next year. Every year we do bridge repairs and improvements. We are proposing a little bit less this year, but I think they'll be very busy with a lot of other projects that we're working on. So hopefully we can get back to funding that next year at the higher level. There's a small item for playground feasibility. There's many playgrounds in this community that are in various stages of their life, and we want to continue to looking at ways to replace them on a regular schedule. The ones we're looking at right now are, of course, Jones Field, which is already funded mostly, and the Gardner Field project is just starting up, and there's been, I believe, the CPC, I believe, is going to support that, but there will be other costs that we'll need to incur to support that
And I
effort.
believe you're also working with the citizens that use those facilities to help.
There's a very well-organized group of folks that live and work in that neighborhood that want something to happen there.
On the Gardner.
Yep.
Great.
Other items are sort of in the out years. They're looking to purchase some of the permanent message boards, make some security improvements at NARA, get a new vehicle for the health department, a new EV, electric vehicle. And then every so often a community does a zoning bylaw recodification. And this is something that we'll need to, where the planning and land use folks have asked for funding to do within the next few years. So we have a placeholder in 23 for that purpose. We also will see a need to replace our radios in a substantial way in 2023. So there's a proposal for that as well. And there's other improvements at NARA that we anticipate needing to do in, as we get closer to the next few years. Are there any questions on general fund projects?
Where does the skate park feature in this sort of planning?
So the skate park is funded through the CPC appropriation, and there's also a contribution from the town of Boxborough, which will be used to complete the project. As I think I mentioned to you recently, the project that was as initially envisioned wasn't able to come to fruition, so we have a different approach that we're looking to bring forward.
Okay.
And we hope to do that this spring, this summer.
Okay. All right. So it's in the CPC funds and they're planning.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Yes.
Thank you.
I know there was, when I was a liaison or even on CPC. There was money that was appropriated, I believe, 2 years ago or last year possibly, for building an amoeba bowl or something like that, whatever they called it, at the skate park. And is that still gonna go forward, or is that?
Right, so that was a phase, that was an additional phase to the skate park project that was
Right.
approved, and what we found is that parts of that phase are much more expensive than, we thought they were, and we have a proposal to do something that still adds and enhances the park and creates the connection to the, lower parking lot that was envisioned, with a nice wide pathway for walkers and skaters and benches and a nice amenity and some more skate, infrastructure, but that big, I think it was actually triangular
Yeah, something.
bowl was not something that, we're looking to do currently. So that's general fund. So then the free cash projects, and you'll see a couple of them are yellow, because those are substantial changes from when the budget was first proposed in December. The first one of those is, we are overhauling the alarm and dispatch alarm systems and the dispatch center, IT infrastructure and all the stuff that they do to log calls as they come in. We had appropriated, I believe it was actually 180 that we had appropriated as a recommendation. We were very fortunate to get a grant to the Community Compact Program just a few months ago of $150,000. So we were able to reduce that appropriation and reassign that funding to other priority needs. The next item we'll be talking about in great detail shortly, which is a proposed work on the Public Works facility. The next item is we're proposing to do a new bathroom, or an accessible bathroom, and make it people be able to access it from the meeting room without having to go downstairs, which is an improvement that the Commission on Disabilities is really advocating for.
Do you mean the room 204?
204 doesn't have a bathroom that we can use.
Right.
So this would make
So
that possible.
Okay, thank you.
The next item is one of the programs that we're able to add after some fortunate and hard work in getting grants. This is $200,000 to address sustainability needs, implement the directives within the Board of Selectmen's sustainability policy. Within that 200, we'll be able to add back to the fleet replacement program for the police. We'll be able to bring on a contractor to serve in the role of a sustainability coordinator. Sustainability coordinator was a request that I had in the budget as a new FTE, but given the way things were this year, it didn't even get past the first week of discussions. But with an opportunity like this, we were able to bring in a contractor to serve in that purpose for 1 year, maybe 18 months, and really move the process forward and serve in that capacity. We'll also be adding to our existing tree planting program, and we'll be increasing our vehicle charging stations. And the next item is...
One second, John.
Sure.
Sustainability means a lot of different things. In this context, we're just talking about environmental sustainability, right?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
The next item we're also going to talk about in great detail, but to just hit it quickly, we're proposing to build on existing work to study our long-term facility needs, and in doing so, incorporate some new items such as figure out a roadmap to get most of our facilities away from fossil fuel heating, which we were able to do, as you know, with the new fire station and the new school building. And we think it'd be helpful to look at our buildings and say, all right, as we replace systems going forward, when does it make sense to make the investments to change the heating source?
Hey, you gonna be looking at that for the public safety building as well?
It would be for all the buildings.
So I mean, as you're looking at, as you're gonna be appropriating money to study the HVAC system there now, is that one of the components that you're looking at? So say maybe drilling wells to put geothermal into that building?
It'll be a consideration. I think you raise a good point that we shouldn't do too much design work on the PSF until we've gotten pretty far with this process.
Yeah, I just think if you're gonna spend the money to look at our facilities and do that, that it would make sense to start with that building that you're planning on replacing the system within how many years out, you know,
Yeah.
it might be a good idea to say, hey, let's look at that now. Do we have the land? Can we put wells on that property to do that?
Thank you, that's a good,
If we could,
it's a good suggestion, I
that'd
like
be
that.
fantastic, and
Thank you.
I think it's great that the schools and the new fire station is gonna be that way.
Okay, great, thank you. Other items, this is another yellow item because in the initial recommendation that I sent to the board, we had proposed, or I had proposed, $120,000 to work towards the removal of the dam at the 53 River Street property. I believe that the CPC will be funding a portion of the need that we have there, but in recent news, we received a grant from the Massachusetts Vulnerability Preparedness Program, $112,000. So we're very excited about that. So that allows us to apply those resources in other high need areas. The next item is design. We have another dam in town that isn't in the same condition as the River Street Dam, but we need to do some work on it. And we also have a bridge called the Lawsbrook Bridge, which we need to start to think about making repairs or potentially replacing it. So we have funding in an out year to start that design process. The next item you'll see is Kelly's Corner. We're going to be proposing to borrow for the right-of-way acquisitions, but this is a different part of the process. It's a voluntary part of the process, but we thought it was important to include it in the revised capital plan so that if we move forward with Kelly's Corner and want to add the pedestrian lighting at the pedestrian scale, which has been recommended, it will be a non-participating item for the most part. The state does pay for sort of the wiring and the base, but everything else would have to be paid for by the community. So if we do decide to go that route, there's a placeholder in the FY23 budget, which is the estimated cost for those. It's important to note that due to the hard work and advocacy of community members and the strong support shown at town meeting, we do have an appropriation that we made at the April 2019 town meeting for design that we found out this summer that the state would actually cover that cost. So we do have that appropriation there, which the community could choose to want to reallocate that money towards the non-participating items. So that's.
How much is that? How much is that money?
The appropriation was $450, I believe. But that'll, you know, as we get through this process, that discussion can happen over the next 2 years, or the next year, rather. Might have that. The next item is Quarry Road streetlights. If you're familiar with where Narrow Park is and where the Public Works kind of, what do we call that? The yard past Narrow Park, the power lines end kind of at Narrow Park. And so there's been a request to bring power further up the street. The utility company won't do that for free. So we would have to pay for that. We weren't able to fit it into this budget, but it's a need that we see out there.
John, would that help at all with the 4th of July celebration? I know you head out that way to get to the parking lot over,
It would, because we bring in generators and provide a lot of temporary lighting, and it would help, certainly. Another item that we're proposing from free cash is complete streets and intersections. Last night in this room, the Board of Selectmen heard presentations about the Prospect Street intersection, and they also heard presentations about Hayward Road and Strawberry Hill Road. The Prospect Street intersection project, there was a design choice that was preferred by the board, and so one of the next phase in design would be to do some design work to actually design it, and so this funding would be set aside for that and various other intersections, including Central Street and Main. The next item, the sidewalk program, we're proposing to fund from borrowing this year, so that's why there's a note there. The next item is traffic calming. As I mentioned, and even at these meetings of the Finance Committee, I often hear requests for things that we can do on our streets to make traffic slow down, to make pedestrians feel safer. These are called traffic calming measures. Corey York does a great job working with the Transportation Advisory Committee and other folks, understanding what things we can do on these streets to improve those situations. You see the rapid flashing beacon that we just added at Hayward and Jefferson. That we just put that in about a month ago, maybe more recent. That was right near the schools, and that really helps. Things like that we can do throughout the community to help with situations. Sometimes it's as simple as road painting, or line painting, or those in the middle, those things you put in the middle of the crosswalks. Sometimes a lot of things we can do with this funding to help throughout the community with people's concerns. So that's the free cash. The next item is general fund borrowing. Again, we have, in the out years, we have appropriation placeholders for the Bellows Farm Dam and the Lawsbrook Bridge. Those are really just placeholders. We don't have enough information to put a specific number in there, but these are just placeholders. The Kelly's Corner right-of-way acquisition process is going to be brought to town meeting, and we'll be asking the town to support the purchase of the right-of-way that we're going to purchase, but also the easements that we're going to need to purchase to do construction along the right-of-way. And we'll need to purchase those easements for multiple years. And we'll have to pay all of the property owners that are impacted the fair, what is it called, the just compensation for what a real estate appraisal says they cost. So we have programmed 1.3 million for that purpose. One of the big acquisitions that we'll be making is Community Lane, and then there's much smaller ones all throughout the Kelly's Corner project. And as you may remember, and as we presented at town meeting last year, we are going to have to acquire several, in the range of 1.3 million, but the state is actually going to be acquiring just as much, if not more, in other parts of the whole network. So it's a combined effort. The next item is DPW, which we're going to present more on shortly. And then the next one is sidewalk program. The other thing that we hear a lot about is sidewalks, and the sidewalk committee just recently was transformed into the Transportation Advisory Committee, and they'll be tasked with helping us to prioritize the sidewalk needs, but there is already a list of prioritized sidewalks, which we are hoping to take a chunk out of with this appropriation and borrowing. There are portions of these projects that engineering and public works have been working on, which are shovel ready. One of these is Great Road. Another is finishing parts of River Street that we've been chipping away at, and we hope that we can get past those two, and then we can start working on the rest of the priorities, because sidewalks are an important matter for the community. So the borrowing is totaling 1.8 million, and the estimated borrowing costs would be 150,000.
That's for the bond? So the borrowing cost is to float the bond and legal and all that stuff?
The annual cost going forward would be 150 for the borrowing. Okay. Yes.
But we don't know that this is the final Kelly's Corner number, right?
Correct, but hopefully it'll be less. But we have to budget for what what conservatively.
Now,
Then
is a DPW building expansion project, is that a whole new building, or is that a expansion onto what we already have?
that's a placeholder because we want to make sure that it's on people's radar. We don't have a design. We don't know what is going to happen at the Public Works facility, but as we're going to talk about in depth shortly, we want to make sure it's on people's radar in case the project moves quickly along. I don't know that it will or not, but we wanted to make sure it's on people's radar.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's the general fund borrowing, and then the next is special revenue funds. So these are funds that, are so I'll just go for the first one. The first one is comprehensive plant improvements. This is funded out of the sewer enterprise, and this is part of the improvements that we'll need to make at the plant, over the next 5 years, that are just part of life cycle, costs, replacement of equipment that's, been in there for 20 years, and various other things that have been recommended by our consultants. The next item is really just another placeholder. There is no East Acton sewer expansion. It's just something that, we put in there in case there ever is a talk of it. 'Cause we have heard from businesses over there that one of the constraints that they have in utilizing their property and renting their property is septic, but there's a lot to discuss there that we haven't even started talking about. The next item is the fire department command vehicle that will be funded from the ambulance enterprise, and we're working to see if we can make that a hybrid.
Now, is that 50,000, is that outfitted or just the vehicle?
Is it outfitted? You wanna go to the mic?
Is it outfitted to
Chief-
you,
Chief
or is that just the straight vehicle, 50K, and then you need to outfit it on top of that?
A little bit of both, so some of that money should pay for some of the upgrade or upfit to make it a command vehicle. That gets expensive depending on what we have to put in there for boxes and securing equipment within the vehicle. So that could be $6,000 or $8,000, even $10,000, so.
So you look at something like the Tahoe size, that type of vehicle, or
That's what we run
smaller?
now, but we're looking at the hybrid options, which is a little bit smaller, like the police cruisers are.
So the next item would be ambulance replacement. This would be from the ambulance enterprise as well, and we are going to lease to own over 3 years. And this would represent the first year cost of getting a new ambulance. The next item is the bike share program. That is a big part of our commuter lot parking facility. It's a bike parking, but we're using commuter lot funds to support that program as it continues. Truck 6 and Truck 104, the cemetery trustees are actually replacing this year. So those are all set. They have a trust fund that they're able to do capital replacements, and these two items are trucks that needed to be replaced probably last year, so it's
overdue.
It's a good improvement for them. The next 4 items are weatherization to multiple facilities, and these are items that I wasn't able to fund this year, mostly because I think there are other sources to fund these grants. Andrea does a great job of working with the utility company and getting rebates and incentives. I just recently signed a contract for Town Hall, a few places in Town Hall and the rec center, all new lights at no cost because of the incentives. So I hope that she'll continue to do that work, and maybe we won't need to fund these
So do you
going
mean-
forward.
You're talking about like LED lighting in the town
Yeah.
hall versus what's?
Yes.
What,
The-
I guess the question is, what type of weatherization needs to be done to these buildings? I don't know if that's an easy
For the
question to answer or
buildings
not.
Do you all know Andrea Steen? Andrea Steen is a municipal property superintendent.
The buildings that are listed here, they're all old buildings, old
Mhm.
windows. Some of it's insulation work, some of it's putting inserts inside over the windows versus replacing the windows, which is much more money. At least this would help with weatherizing at the moment.
Okay.
And those inserts can be taken out during the
Yes.
months that they don't need
I
to be
actually
stored.
have proposals in hand right now, but we weren't able to fund it this round.
Thank you.
The next item is a roll-off truck. Roll-off truck is the big truck that the dumpster roll-offs are put onto, and then they bring them to wherever trash goes. And then they bring them back, and ours is old, and this would be funded entirely through the transfer station funding. Then last year, we started the process of looking at the transfer station for improvements, and we're considering that part of the whole DPW complex. And so that we anticipate continuing to fund if the feasibility study shows that there are things that we need to do. The next items are things that were settled at the special town meeting. So that's the 5-year plan. And I took a little bit longer with that than I wanted to, so I'll try to be quicker going forward. So I just wanted to get back to the $60,000 study that we talked about. We have a study in hand from 2015 that shows our needs over the next 20 years, and we can talk about that shortly. But we want to take the work from that and build on it and incorporate the ADA recommendations. Last night, the Board of Selectmen accepted the ADA transition plan, which was a few years worth of work of looking at every building and every walkway and identifying things we need to do to make them more accessible for everybody. And so that's a piece of data that wasn't available in 2015. So we'd add that, and then we'd also do the roadmap to transition away from fossil fuel. We'd look at aligning any roof reconstruction or replacement with potential solar. So I just wanted to give you more details on that. The 2015 study is actually pretty good. There's a lot of data in there. It's available online. It was published at the time, and there's a link here if you wanted to check it out. But it basically broke things down into priorities. Priority 1 was things we need to do right away. Priority 2 was within the next 5 years, and 3, so on. As I'll show you on the next slide, or the next few slides, we've done most of the priority 1 items over the last 5 years, and we've actually done most of the priority 2 items as well. So we've made significant progress, and that's another reason why we need to take another look at the long-term needs, because they've changed. This is difficult to read, and I can distribute this afterwards, but basically the first column is priority 1 items, and the second is priority 2 items. And as I mentioned, we've done most of these. The civil defense building, which is the second row, that's a building that we're proposing to dispose of at the town meeting. Hopefully no one that's looking to bid on it is watching right now and seeing what we've identified as capital needs, because it might hurt our bids. But that is one item that, rather than investing all that in this facility, maybe there's a better use for it. So we're going to try to sell it. The Kennedy building, as many of you know, was completely rehabbed recently. The big ticket items at the library were already taken care of.
What is the Kennedy building?
It's at the cemetery. It's the facility where okay. And so, I can talk to you about any of these in particular, but I know the 2 things that we wanted to talk about tonight were the fire stations and the public works facility. So the next part of the presentation is just focused on those items. So if you look at the fire station, Center Fire Station, Station 1, which is right across from Town Hall, they have identified that we needed new heating, new cooling, some roof repair work, all new lighting and flooring, and we've done all those things. Andrea's done a great job working with the fire chief and other folks to make sure that we're able to do these projects. So we feel like that station is in a good place in terms of the most pressing needs right now, and we're not in a position to do anything substantial to it in the near future, which is why when we talked about the new fire station over the last year, and people said, what about the other fire stations? We said, those are older and they'll need attention at some point, but we've been paying a lot of attention to them lately, and although they would always be served to be improved, we're comfortable with them right now. So it's the same thing. The same items identified at South Station, which is on School Street, we've invested in funding to address all those needs. All new lighting, the new heating and cooling, some flooring, and some work on the generator. The third station, Station 3, is on Central Street. Same thing, we did all new heating and cooling, all new lighting, a lot of it through green community grants and incentives that Andrea found, which was very helpful. So we didn't have to spend as much money as they said we would have to spend on lighting because we got a lot of it at a discount. So, you know, but as we look at those three buildings, and I'm going to give you a more in-depth look at them very shortly, but keep in mind some of the things that if we were to do some study work on these buildings, things that we would probably want to look at are building security, better separation of apparatus from living areas, adding decontamination facilities. As you know, we have an excellent new decontamination facility plan for the new building, and the other ones don't have the same. Training, storage is always a need, the width of the garage bays, office space, and then general upgrades to finishes and fixtures, accessibility. Some of those things are more urgent than others, but all of them we believe we can address without a major project in the near future, certainly in the next 5 to 10 years. The next item is I'd like to take you through the three stations with our deputy, who wasn't able to join us tonight in person, but he is here online. Uh-oh, what did I do? I gotta just try to figure out how to run it here.
Alright, wait. Just in case this works. Hold on a sec. You're gonna have to possibly.
Chief, you might be narrating.
Hello, I'm Bob Vanderhoof. I'm the Deputy Fire Chief here in Acton, and we're going to take a tour through the three fire stations that are currently existing in the town of Acton. So this is the entry door. This station is located at 256 Central Street. It's Station 3. This is the entry area of our small lobby, where folks can come in and be greeted here in this small office. This is the original fire alarm office that was put together as our main dispatch center for the fire department. As we walk through the lobby, we enter into the apparatus floor area. This fire station is a 4-bay drive-through type fire station. It was built in around 1960, and this houses our 2 pumpers, command car, and a brush unit. So as we walk down next to engine 23, we can see it's kind of a tight walkway. Exhaust systems, fire gear hanging alongside the wall, which isn't optimal, as storage is very sparse, as we have to have our fire gear out in the main apparatus floor area, where it can be subject to particulates from exhaust from fire vehicles. In the back we have our utility room, which is kind of a collect-all for maintenance, tools, investigating equipment, compressors for our air compress self-contained breathing apparatus, kind of a repair shop. Not a lot of space and separation for so many of the things that we should have separated. So back into the apparatus bay, this is kind of a shot from the back of the station. As you can see, it is a open drive-through concept, and technically all of our storage is kept pretty much in the apparatus bay area with regards to fire gear, aquatic rescue equipment, and spare fire hose. This room here is our furnace room. Our boiler is located in here, recently upgraded. This is probably the most open space that we'll have in the station, as we're not allowed to keep storage of any kind within the boiler room or electrical panel area. The station contains a janitor's closet, fairly small, with a sink and some cleaning supplies for the station and our fire apparatus. This is the lobby area. To the left is where our former fire department dispatch center was located. Side entrance door, downstairs lavatory. So this is just a second bunk room for one firefighter. This was actually an old chief's office that's been converted into a bunk room. So as you enter here, to the right is the captain's quarters. It's a bunk facility with his desk, shared by our captain command staff for 4 groups. This is the living quarters here, where we have chairs, dining area, our kitchen facility, fairly modest with stove, of course, refrigerator, and a microwave. And the other bunk facility is a bunk room for 2 firefighters. This is our rear exit, which leads to the back roof, and the fire escape, which takes us out down to the rear of the station. So hello, so here we are at Station 1. This is the Acton Center Firehouse, covering District 1. It's located at 7 Concord Road here in Acton Center. It's a 3-bay fire station. It's one of the older fire stations that we have. It was built in around 1950. As you can see, the trucks just barely fit within the smaller doors, as fire engines from years ago were quite smaller. So we'll take a walk inside and check out the interior of the fire station. It's the side entrance here that goes into the entry area. The little room to the left here is a radio room, which is common in most older fire stations. A radio room is just to the phones, two-way radio to communicate back to the fire alarm office. Through this door here is our apparatus quarters. This houses our primary ambulance and 2 pumpers. As you can see, navigating through this station is kind of tight. Like the station at West Acton, we have a storage deficiency, so to speak, so many things are kept out in the open. A rescue boat, lawn care equipment, air bottle filling station, workbench. This essentially is the do-all room space here right on the apparatus floor. This station only has one other room, and it's the boiler room, where it houses an upgraded boiler system. This room has some stored items in here due to space, where there's really no choice in where to keep some of these things. Our downstairs lavatory is also located in this boiler room space.
Anybody seen enough?
And then the rear exit door that leads us to the outside.
I've seen it all.
At the top of the stairs is our EMS office.
So I can send the link. The other station in South Acton is very similar to West Acton. They were built within a year of each other with the same idea. So, but I can share this if you want to watch the full thing later. Thanks, you're gonna bring me back.
Can I ask something out of curiosity to the chief? I know every fire station, you guys had the radio room that was used many years ago. Has there been any consideration? I know it's like a little museum, but have you guys considered using it as a storage area? Why has it not been done?
Sure. So we still use the radio room for box receive. So we have master boxes throughout the town, the red box you see on buildings and utility poles. So when those come in, we have information. It's really a very old, antiquated system, but it works. So we still have that system that's in there, which is the majority of the equipment that's in that room. We also use it for charging stations for portable lights, portable radios. So it's a heavily used little room. So
you guys still use it?
yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
That leads me to a question, which is, do the emergency box systems go straight to the normal 911 dispatch center?
So yes, they go to the dispatch center as well as the 3 stations.
So they call both places at the same time?
Yes, it's on a circuit, so.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions on fire stations before we move to the public works facility?
Yeah, I'd just like to make a comment. I've toured all 3 stations and they look better in the video than they do in person.
ActonTV does a great job. No, I think you know, they're built 50 years ago,
Yeah.
or more than that. So they certainly are aged, but they function, and the department does a great job out of there and in the community. So thank you. So the next project that we wanted to talk about was the DPW facility. And when we say DPW facility, we're talking about not just the building that is shown where the address is, but the whole site. So the entrance on Forest Road, the driveway leading up to where people can get salt or sand, the transfer station, which is called out there, the fuel depot, which is called out there. The salt shed is actually pretty new, so hopefully we don't need to do anything with that. The whole recycling area, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, and then the Route 2 entrance. What we're talking about doing is doing a study to look at the whole thing and identify ways that we can improve the functionality and the operations. We can have, within the building where the offices are, and also has the apparatus bay, so find ways to improve air quality by separating those better. Improve the safety and security of the facilities and the surroundings. There isn't, if you've been to the transfer station, it's not that hard to get to the yard, and so there's things that we'd want to do differently if we were looking at the whole thing at once. We can implement energy efficiency and sustainability best practices. We can improve the fuel depot to a modern safety standards. Even if we do an all-electric fleet, we will still need fuel for the big rigs, at least for the near future, as far as we know. If we're able to find ways to put more shelter on the property, it would help the longevity of our equipment. The improvements to the site would enhance customer service experience for the public, the public is on that site very often because of the transfer station, so it's a very actively used site. And it gives us a chance to look at the needs of the DPW and Acton residents' needs as it relates to the DPW over the next 50 years. Just to show you something that you're familiar with, this is the work of that 2015 study. There wasn't anything major that was needed other than it's just an old warehouse style building with garage space and then offices. We've gotten rid of some asbestos flooring. That was one of the bigger things that we've done there, and done some repainting, and Andrea got us some good deals on lighting. But other than that, we haven't done much there lately. So right now, last year, at the last town meeting, there was an appropriation through the transfer station funds to do a feasibility study of the site. So we're starting that process right now with an RFQ. The RFQ will look at the updating the building condition and space needs study work that has already been performed. It'll look at the operations of DPW, the transfer station, the recycling facility, fueling station, and look at different rehabilitation, replacement concepts. It'll look at the traffic patterns and the parking and the site movements and the access and the egress, and it'll prepare conceptual layouts and schematic designs for ways to improve the site with cost estimates for the community to consider. We'd also meet with boards and committees as needed to share the information and get input. So as I mentioned in the budget, in the long-term capital plan, there is funding in the current year to do this feasibility study, which we're starting now. As part of that process, we'll engage with stakeholders, and through that process, we hope to identify a preferred option or options to move forward. And it could be very simply changing, the layout of the way that works on the outside, or it could be more comprehensive. We want to look at ways to improve the functionality in the long term. We also will present results to the Selectmen Finance Committee, and we'll hold a public forum like we have for many other projects that we work on. So that's the feasibility study. The feasibility study is when you take a good hard look at what we think the needs are and what ways we can address them. And from that, there's a report, and the community can either decide to implement recommendations or not. So in the event that we decide to implement some of the recommendations without the ability to understand necessarily what they'll be, we have additional placeholder of design funding for FY22, just to kind of start the process of something, and then a placeholder in 2023 separating half and half from transfer station and free cash to do design development, and then a placeholder in 2024 for a borrowing from general funds and transfer station funds in the event that it's the direction that we take. But this is a 5-year plan, and the only year that we're implementing is FY21. So, but it's important for us to communicate these as needs. The Public Works Director and the other folks in town have been asking for work on this facility for a few years, and so this is how we're proposing to move forward. I should have started with this one. Sorry.
No more videos. Sorry. That made me nauseous.
Sorry.
Any questions from the committee? Steve?
Just a comment. The 2015 report that John made reference to and showed some of the pages is a good place to start. It's not an easy read. There's no plot to it. It was a very dry engineering type assessment of each and every building we owned and what was wrong with it and what it would cost to fix it. But it does give you a very good understanding of what needs to be done. I'm happy to hear we got most of the short-term things done. I've been seeing the Capitol for the past few years and know that it was meant to do that. One of the biggest unknowns, well, and do remember it's 2015, so it's somewhat dated. There's talk about senior centers and things like that, which again is something that's already been addressed. But the Public Works building, I've been there too, and we could use a new one, or at least an expansion of the one we got. But by all means, read the report for yourselves.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was great.
No questions for Corey?
Close Well, I would like to see that, what they use in Hingham, when you throw your trash into a compactor, and it compacts right in the back of the truck, and they just pull it out into the box, instead of throwing it in and watching the big excavator run around and have all the diesel fumes going.
Well,
And
it's
then
funny
that
that
might
you
be
mention
some-
it.
that might be something to look at when they look at that project.
Right, so a part of what the part of the review is of the operations and how we're using the facilities, and maybe a recommendation like that would come from that review.
They use it in Hingham, and I would suggest people would take a look at that, if, you know, on a, when they're going through the study, take a look at a system like that. It just, to me, seems to make a lot more sense to push a button and just run around a big giant excavator.
In the 2015 study, it didn't address those types of things. It was an assessment of buildings, not of
Yeah.
operations. So
You won't need a big building.
that's kind of what I took away from it.
And,
Not my area.
Well, I
but-
mean, if you had the compactors, you don't need the buildings, I'm saying, you don't need a building to throw the trash into, because you just, it goes in this little thing, kind of like the, similar to, we do with the, paper.
The civil defense building, where are you gonna move those antique engines to? Where are they gonna live?
We're working on that,
Your garage.
and we will not let them deteriorate. Those are valuable parts of our fleet. So,
Sounds good?
All right,
Thanks, John.
thank you.
thank you.
Enterprise and Revolving Funds, Mr. Bryan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the select board, select board.
Finance committee, come on.
Finance committee. It's getting,
Wow,
it's
get
getting
promoted.
late, I'm tired, it's past my bedtime.
We get salaries now.
So before I get into tonight's primer, there's a couple of things I want to mention. So the next finance committee meeting, I'd like to present the Q2 update on the
Right.
town
Next
operations,
Tuesday?
which will be specifically getting into the specific numbers of the enterprise funds and the general fund.
The March 3rd or March 10th?
March 3rd is the
You
next
pick
one.
a
March
date.
3rd,
Third
would be
is
great.
March, we'll shoot for March 3rd.
So March 3rd, you're gonna do the, I'm sorry,
So, having saying that, tonight's presentation or this primer is not getting into the individual budget numbers, which again, I think will happen at the next meeting. But it's kind of an overview of what an enterprise fund, what a revolving fund is, and the differences between the two. And I know there's some confusion there sometimes. And then before we get into this presentation, I just want to make a comment, because I think it's important that you think about this going to this presentation. So, enterprise funds and revolving funds offer a community the flexibility to take certain programs and services out of the general fund operations and allow them to be funded by user fees or program fees. So think about that as we're discussing this and we're going through it, okay? So you're pulling it out of general fund operations and it's being funded through program fees or user fees, okay? The second thing I wanted to mention to you in going through this material, and I think it's important again to think about this as we're going through it, the differences between enterprise funds and revolving funds. One, enterprise funds can accommodate a tax subsidy, and we've seen that. And we've seen that in that data in the Q1, Q2, Q3 reports. And we know every year that some of these funds have a general fund tax subsidy. In enterprise funds, revolving funds do not allow that. So that's one of the differences between the two. Secondly, enterprise funds allow for fixed assets. So for instance, the sewer enterprise fund has tangible assets in that particular fund itself, the sewage treatment plant, and they're depreciated within that fund. You also see that in the year-end report, the audit report, the CAFA, you'll see those fixed assets and they're pulled out of the general fund and you'll see it isolated there. Unlike revolving funds, which do not allow for fixed assets. The third item would be debt service. So enterprise fund allow for debt service to be paid out of that fund. Specifically, we have the ambulance enterprise fund, which pays debt service for apparatus that we purchased and put through the ambulance enterprise fund. And obviously, the sewer enterprise fund is also pays for the debt service. And then the fourth thing would be impact on the tax rate. The enterprise funds go through the tax rate final determination with State Department of Revenue, unlike revolving funds, which do not. And the reason why enterprise funds do is think about this, because enterprise funds, if you have a tax subsidy, that needs to be calculated and part of the final determination of what your tax rate's gonna be. Revolving funds don't have that component. So as we're going through this, just kind of think about that. So, Enterprise and Revolving Funds, what are they? Well, I kind of mentioned, it gives the communities the flexibility to account for separately all the financial activities of a particular mini business, if you would, outside of the general fund. It establishes separate counting and financial records. We see that when I do a quarterly update. We talk about the general fund operations, then we get into the various enterprise funds and what those operations look like. Expenses, revenues, kind of a P&L where we are. We kind of do projections. We look at some of the nuances I talk about all the time in those particular funds, because the revenue streams, they're not always linear. Sometimes revenues happen at different times of the year, or certain expenses hit. We also use the encumbrance method. It's not specific to enterprise or revolving, but these are some of the nuances that we deal with. So the revenues expenses of the service are segregated into a separate fund with its own financial statement. So we look at that. We always say, what does the P&L look at? It's kept separately from the general fund on our books. So we have the general fund, big picture. We know what the operating budget is, and we also know what those expenses are. We can run reports on that. Well, the same thing with these enterprise funds and revolving funds. So we can run separate reporting for each one of these funds. In the case of enterprise fund, they carry their own fixed assets and debt service if they have any, unlike revolving funds, which do not. So why do we have enterprise fund? It's a really good, useful tool for analyzing certain revenue streams and expenses and performance of those as well. Also helps us to decide whether we have proper user fees in place or charges in place to cover the total cost. From time to time, you'll see certain department heads that run these enterprise funds or revolving funds. We request the Board of Selectmen to increase the fees because it needs to cover the expenses. As expenses are going up, the fees have to go up to accommodate for that, so we'll have changes from time to time. So it's good in identifying what those needs are of that particular fund. And again, the enterprise funds can include fixed assets and infrastructure and recognize the depreciation on those as an annual basis. Revolving funds cannot. Not all enterprise have fixed assets. Two primarily are the ambulance enterprise fund, but specifically the sewer enterprise fund. The sewer enterprise fund, as we all know, has a sewage treatment plant and all that infrastructure that was put in place. So why adopt an enterprise fund? Well, it retains investment income, so if you have surpluses, it sits in that fund. You can use that to appropriate at a later time. And that appropriation requires town meeting action. So if you have fund balances, we talk about what the free cash certification is in the general fund, but also the enterprise funds have that same free cash certification. Those monies can be spent at the subsequent town meeting for capital improvements or replacement of vehicles or so on and so forth. It's important to know that. So enterprise funds are determined by the state what enterprise funds can be used. It's all controlled under Massachusetts general law. Some of the enterprise funds that State Department of Revenue determines that they can be established for is public utilities, for instance, our sewer enterprise fund, healthcare, recreation, transportation, and then some of the examples of public utilities are water, sewer, trash, healthcare, ambulance, nursing, recreation, skating rinks, pools, golf courses, those such things. Transportation, shuttle service, airports, docks, wharfs. This is kind of DOR's guidelines. So what enterprise funds does the town of Acton have? I think most of us are probably pretty familiar. We have 5 of them right now. One of them is ambulance. We have septage, which is separate from sewers. So we have sewers, so we have septage. We have transfer, recycling, and we have transportation. So just to get into kind of a little bit of the details of them. Now, I don't have numbers. I'm not the subject matter expert in these funds, but I'm going to kind of give you a general overview of what they are and what their purpose was. So the first one, Ambulance Enterprise Fund, was established in 2010. Its primary purpose, obviously, is to provide ambulance and medical services to the citizenry at large at quicker response times. We thought it was important that we bring that service in-house because we're right here in town. We control that. We thought it, especially in the case where we went from EMTs to paramedics, now we have paramedics, so advanced life support, first responders on scene. where subsequently we had to have an EMT, well, we went with an EMT originally, and then it required an ALS call or advanced life support, then we'd have to call in a paramedic. So we cut that out by going all paramedic. I think that's critical for folks to understand in that ambulance enterprise fund, the importance of doing that. So migrating from EMTs over to paramedics was a huge, benefit to me for the citizenry, because it gets you that best service that we can provide as far as, getting paramedics there first on scene. So the ambulance enterprise fund, as I had mentioned, it does pay for some debt service on some prior apparatus that we purchased out of it. So it covers that. And also 9 FTEs. So we have 8 paramedics and we have 1 ALS coordinator that oversees that. So right now, that's currently the way the ambulance enterprise fund is structured. And as I had mentioned, any kind of related services, expenses in that budget are also covered in the debt service. Septic Enterprise Fund, that was established back in 1989, and basically the purpose for this was to provide services for Title V reviews and replacements. So if anybody has sold their home or knows that they have to do a Title V inspection, I think since 1995 that came into place. And so if you go to sell your home, generally they want a current Title V done on that property. And staff goes out, they look at that, and they inspect it to make sure everything is in compliance, there's no issues. So there's a fee charge for that. We also have septic plan review that staff does. So as people come in and they're looking for a new septic plan, either replacement or new subdivision, and they're coming in for a new septic plan, the Board of Health goes over those plans and they charge a fee for that too, to make sure everything's compliance and everything is meeting the correct needs. We also do soil testing, and so perk tests. So you go out, you get a vacant lot, you want to know if that perks and it meets the certain test. We go out, we analyze that test, we make sure it meets the requirements as a successful perk to call it a building lot, so we do that as well. And we do stream sampling. I don't know if you've seen our folks out from time to time, but they'll be out there with the little vials and they'll be taking water out of the various streams to make sure that, there's not contaminants in there that don't belong in there, and maybe trace them down on where they're coming from. And then we also have the septic haulers. So as you folks are replacing or pumping your septic systems on a regular basis, those haulers also charge the fee, and that goes through this Septic Enterprise Fund. Basically, it covers the cost of those services and some associated, other components of that within that fund itself. So it's pretty much self-funding. No tax subsidy there. So the Sewer Enterprise Fund was established about 20 years ago, in 2001. Again, for the sole purpose of providing public disposal of sewage in town, right? We all know we were probably one of the largest, I think, communities in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that had no infrastructure in place for public sewer at all. So the expenses in the Sewer Enterprise Fund is really the acquisition costs. So that Sewer Enterprise Fund was established, and the expenses were put into it to be borne by the users. So those people that were benefited from it, and then the people that were hooked up to it. So the annual operations and maintenance also goes through that. So we have a contract with a subcontractor that handles our plant, and they do all the maintenance and review and making sure everything's in compliance, so we don't have any issues or problems down there. That's all found out. So we have the debt service we get to pay for the infrastructure we put in place, and then we have the annual operations. Those are the 2 major expenses in this fund. How do you pay for that? Well, one, we all know we have sewer betterments annually assessed to the quarterly tax bills. Secondly, we have the monthly O&M bills we send out on a regular basis. And then from time to time, we get privilege fees. We say, well, what's a privilege fee? So a privilege fee would be an enhancement or a more, what's the right word I'm looking for? Intense use, I guess, of when you initially got assessed that betterment. So if you were a single family home on day one, when you were assessed that original betterment, you were assessed 1 sewer betterment unit because you were a single family home. Sometime down the road, you decided you wanted to subdivide that property, and you wanted to, because you had enough land area, and now you broke out a separate building lot. That's a more intense use of that original property that assessed 1 betterment unit. That's called a privilege fee. You don't get to spread that over time like you do the betterment. You had a choice of that betterment to pay it up front, all in one lump sum payment, or you could pay it over time. The privilege fee is all due 1 installment now, so up front. So that's a privilege fee. And so those fees also go into the fund to help supplement some of the expenses. So transfer station and recycling fund, it's changed a little bit through the years. It was first developed in the 1980s. It provides funding for the town's solid waste and disposal operations. And also we have contractor services in there that actually haul away some of the material that's brought down to the transfer station too. We have to pay to have that hauled away. Some of the programs that transfer and recycling does is they recycle a lot of more materials now than they did in the past when we went to pay as you throw. And that limited the number of trash going into the normal system. It's getting pulled out now, we're recycling. Some of that's metals, plastics, glass, mixed paper. Transfer and recycling has always been paid, fully supported 100% by user fees. From time to time, you might see a drawdown on fund balance, but it's a planned drawdown. And what I mean by that, from time to time, Director York will have a plan in place, and we talked about it tonight, and John talked about it in special revenue accounts, that there may be purchases paid out of there directly for capital improvements or capital replacement. For instance, some vehicles associated just with transfer and recycling, he might do a 5-year lease program. Some of the bulldozers and backhoes or some of the higher end apparatus that'll go through there. So that's not part of his normal operation. So a lot of times he'll take down fund balance, and town meeting obviously acknowledges that, and we highlight that and delineate it. So the Transportation Enterprise Fund, we know, is relatively new. That was established in 2010 for the demand for providing public transportation to the citizen at large. A lot of that is a vulnerable population. A good portion of that is really for seniors. About 74% of that population is for seniors. It's an award-winning transportation program that provides, really, it's kind of door-to-door services if you need it, and then the shuttle service, or the fixed route commuter shuttle service. So we have that service as well, which has been probably ramping up quite a bit, especially with the commuter lot changes down there. So now, and we're looking at always kind of expanding that because there's a great need for that. So that's kind of what Transportation Enterprise Fund does. It's basically, we call it the Transportation Enterprise Fund. We call it the hard services. It's really kind of the buses, the transportation, the physical buses themselves. And then on the flip side, you have in the revolving fund, we'll talk about that a little bit, you also have a revolving fund, Crosstown Connect Transportation Fund, which, and I'll get into that after, but it's dispatch. So, revolving funds. So what's a revolving?
The train station parking lot, that's not part of transportation, is it?
Yeah, so the commuter lot parking lot is what they call a special revenue fund. So it's not an enterprise fund and it's not a revolving fund. It's what the state refers to as a special revenue fund. That comes with its own set of rules as well. Yeah.
Regarding the transportation fund, my understanding is that that is the sort of thing we should always expect to have to put money into from the general fund. That transportation is pretty much never self-supporting.
Well, we always kid about it. When you mention transportation, we say transportation means subsidy. It's you look at the MBTA. Yeah, it's pretty well supported with general fund taxation and other sources of revenue. So, for instance, and we'll get into this at the next meeting, but transportation has a pretty significant general fund tax support. It also is drawing money from the commuter lot, and then we're also getting money from the LRTA, and that's really where the bulk of those revenues are coming from. If you're expecting user fees to pay for that service, it's minimal amount of money.
And that's true across the board.
Yeah.
I mean, the MTA in New York has the same situation too. Transportation funds in general do not support themselves.
Yeah. So revolving funds, so they're considered special revenue funds that have their own revenues and expenses, but do not carry any assets, like I had mentioned, or any debt service. Some revolving funds that do not need town meeting appropriation. So you're saying, well, how do they get their funding? A lot of the times, they have, by state law, such as school lunch, they don't need special appropriation at town meeting or town manager. So by state law, any school lunch money that comes in can just be spent. In the case of recreation, recreation doesn't go to town meeting, but the town manager oversees recreation. He establishes the budget for recreation. So again, there's some different nuances between the funds. So revolving funds, they're typically authorized by state law for programs or services with expenses that fluctuate. You know, you might see trends that will impact revolving funds, but in any case, revolving funds, their fees are established based on their expenses. And so as expenses increase, the fees can increase. As expenses decrease, they could decrease. I'm not sure if they have, but they do fluctuate. And they can be matched with, or they're matched with fees, charges, and any other revenues. It's pretty straightforward with revolving funds. So what revolving funds does Acton have? We get quite a few. Historic District Commission, Building Department, and some of you may not even realize that we have some of these. Building Department, Sealer of Weights, Hazardous Materials Inspection, Food Service Inspection, Stormwater, Crosstown Connect, Fire Alarm Network, and Roadway Maintenance. So I'll quickly go through just kind of an overview of what specifically they are. Again, I don't know all the nitty-gritty details, but this is kind of a big picture discussion. So Historic District Commission, so they provide oversight, rulings, and guidance on properties within historic areas or have historic issues. Receipts from applications, fees, and expenses are incidental to operations are coming into this fund. From time to time, they'll have expenses. Again, it might be purchases of, I don't know, letterheads or stationery to put out notifications and so on and so forth. Their budget's $200 a year. So I generally don't see them spending most of it, but that's the Historic District Commission's budget. Building Department, so Building Department's revolving fund is inspectional service for electrical, gas, and plumbing permits. So in those cases, we outsource that. So these are not staff, these are subcontractors that we contract out. So they go out, they provide those services. Generally, we know that depending on the permit, how many inspections will be done. So if it might be a new house, there's so many inspections that need to be done for electrical, rough, final, whatever the case. There's a fee structure that goes with that. So that fee structure pays for that contractor to go out and do that inspection. And a component of that is also help to offset the admin costs. So the internal office help admin costs to oversee that. We gotta monitor it, we gotta know who's going out, when the inspection was done, and then we gotta pay them for that, so that's all gotta be kept control of. So a piece of that fee also goes to help offset town, operating, the staff. So it's pulled out of the general fund and put into the revolving fund. It's also used to, cover, document, archival, so we do a lot of, taking all these documents in these permits, and then we, scan them and we have them sent back to us, so there's a fee associated with that. That also goes through here. And that's pretty much it for building revolving. Sealer of weights. So this fee covers the cost of inspecting scales and various measuring tools. So you figure gas pumps, every gas pump in town here needs to go out to make sure that when you're pumping a gallon into your gas tank, that it is a gallon and not, 90% of a gallon, that the actual measurements are correct. Also, food measuring scales. So if you go into the deli and you get a pound of, boar's head roast beef, it's certainly a pound, not an ounce more or an ounce less. And then also price checkout. So when you go out there and if you go into a store and it says, $3.99 a pound, and you bring it up to the cash register and they bring up $4.99 a pound, they also confirm and check those as well. So there's a fee associated with that. There's annual inspections that go out to verify that these measuring tools are accurately and precisely stating what they are actually saying. All these services are provided with town staff, so that's all done internally. So that's sealer of weights. Hazardous material inspection. So this fee covers the cost of providing inspections for anybody that's storing hazardous materials on site. There's an annual inspection, and there's certain compliances that have to be met. Where it's stored, how it's stored, why it's stored, when it's stored, the proximity to certain things, and so on and so forth. So there's an inspector that goes out there to make sure these things are all being followed. And then underground storage tanks as well. So in the past, at one time, we had a substantial of, I think, underground storage tanks. I think a lot of them have been removed through the years, but a lot of homes that actually had oil storage tanks in there, they weren't in the basements, but they were buried in the ground adjacent to their property. So I think through the years, those have all been pretty much removed, but we still have some underground storage tanks. Obviously, most of the gas stations here in town all have underground storage. But all these services are provided with town staff, and some of their associated salaries with providing that service are also obviously being covered by that permit fee as well. So food service inspection, the fees here cover the cost of staff's time to inspect any public food preparation facility. So anybody that's preparing preparing public food is going to get an inspection, and they're going to pay a fee for that to make sure they're compliant. Food's not taken out of the refrigerator too many hours in advance of cooking it up, and so on and so forth. So there's rules and regulations, hand washing stations, and versus dishwashing stations, and making sure everything is following good order. And then that also does include outside inspectors as well. So we do use an outside resource there to assist with that. And again, a portion of that fee is to cover that expense of us going out and providing that service as well, and specifically for that outside contractor. Stormwater, this was something relatively new in the past few years. Well, it might be a number more than the past few years now. But its purpose was really to preserve and protect the town's groundwater resource. As we know, the water here in town is very valuable. We have shallow wells here in town, so it's very important that we protect those. So the fees collected to cover the cost to test the water compliance issues. So we're making sure that storm drains in different places in town that are certain materials and things aren't ending up there that don't belong there. And if they are, then we track them down and try to figure out where it's coming from and who's in violation of that. So again, it's all compliance, and it's all to make sure that we're keeping our groundwater protected, and because as we know, it's our drinking water ultimately. So, and most of this is coming from the commercial and some multifamily homes that are impacted by this.
Brian, a quick question. So the Acton Water District, do they duplicate this, or they don't do any of this?
I'm not sure, Sam. I really don't know. Yeah. I don't know.
That's fine.
Okay. All right. So Crosstown Connect, I kind of touched on this earlier. So Crosstown Connect is kind of the revolving answer or side to the Enterprise Fund. The Enterprise Fund I talked about was the hard services, the bus, and some of those services associated with that bus. Crosstown Connect is dispatch services. So think about soft costs, hard costs. And Crosstown Connect basically houses private and public money to provide those services. So we have various partners with Crosstown Connect. Two of those primary partners are Littleton and Maynard that actually contribute to that because we had shared services. So they actually help with the dispatch for council on aging, and that's probably the big one. That's kind of where this really initiated start. Then we kind of took it from there and kind of expanded it. So think of Enterprise Fund as the buses and Crosstown Connect as dispatch services to get those buses to the people. Fire alarm network, the chief had touched on this a little bit tonight. So we do have call boxes in town. I think right now there are about, there's about 300 of them. So I think there's about 300 call boxes still left in town. Those may be at a particular facility. I think they're still on utility poles. They're still in operation. As the chief said, it goes to 911, and it also goes to the fire station. It's been around for many years, so we've been maintaining it, and we maintain it by charging a user fee for those people that have those call boxes. So for instance, if you have a call box at your facility, every year they'll go out there and do an inspection to make sure it's properly working, and you're charged the fee for doing that. So that's where those fees come from. And it's presently being funded through this fire alarm network, using the firemen will actually go out and do those inspections to make sure it's correctly working. So, and there's also a fund balance there the chief has, and from time to time he'll use that to buy certain things that support the fire alarm network as well out of there. And I think they just did some upgrades to some of their system this past year in there as well. So in some cases with revolving funds, you might see expenses at 90,000, but the revenue coming in is only 60. Well, it's a specific drawdown because we know we're not gonna, the revenue is the revenue, the call boxes are the call boxes, they don't increase. We haven't raised our fees, but it's a specific drawdown on that fund balance to provide either, you know, some capital upgrades or whatever the needs might be, so. And the final one we have, which is relatively new, which is pretty interesting. So roadway maintenance. So if you think of roadway maintenance, so let's say Corey York, Director York, just went out and paved Main Street. And then all of a sudden, one of the neighbors comes in 2 weeks later and says, oh, by the way, I need a street cut permit because I want to hook up gas to my house. So now there's a fee associated with that because now you have a brand new street and you're cutting it. And then generally what happens when you cut, the more you cut into a road, the more problems you're gonna have. Especially being a new road, and now you're cutting into it, and now you're patching it and repairing it. So the roadway maintenance program basically covers the cost of those repairs when a street cut permit is required. So the caveat is the newer the road, the higher the fee. The older the road, the less the fee, which makes absolute sense. And so but I mean, that's kind of it in a nutshell. It's more detailed than that, but think about that. So if you just replace the road, now you're going in to cut it, you're gonna pay a higher fee because it's a brand new road as opposed to a road that hasn't been paved in 30 years or so. But that's what that basically does. And it's a pretty good program. It's just kind of getting underway right now. And Christie?
Is there any notification to neighbors when a road's going in?
Not
Just
sure.
saying, hey, if you're gonna do, like, to avoid road
Yeah.
cuts that people know.
So hurry up and do it now before the
Yeah.
road gets paved. I'm not sure if there is. I really don't know.
Thank
You know, good question.
Good, yeah.
So that's all I have. So again, just in kind of summary, I just want, you know, as a reminder, Enterprise and Revolving Funds give the town flexibility. We pull certain operations out of the general fund that have its own revenue sources to cover those expenses where the general citizenry at large does not pay. So it's the end user that pays for that. And so kind of keep that in mind. And then the big differences between enterprise funds, which are impacted by potentially the tax rate if you have a subsidy, revolving funds do not. Assets in an enterprise fund where they don't have assets sitting in a revolving fund. Debt service, which can be paid out of a revolving fund, but you can't, I mean, out of an enterprise fund, but you can't out of revolving. And then the other item would be where you can accommodate a tax subsidy in an enterprise fund where you don't in a revolving fund. So those are kind of the real, that to me in a nutshell is really where the differences are between an enterprise fund and a revolving fund. So when we're talking enterprise revolving, we kind of know, and they're both two different sections of Massachusetts general law, and they have their own set of rules and regulations to follow. So
Thank
that's
you.
kind of it in a nutshell.
Can we get a copy of that text that you used?
Sure.
Thank you.
I believe you said for some of the enterprise funds that they cover some of the salaries, et cetera, for town employees that are used relative to those funds. When we get the town budget in January, how is that indicated? We see something about employees, their salaries, overtime, et cetera, per department. Is that exclusive of their usage by the enterprise funds?
So when you get that budget in January, yeah, I see what
I'm wondering how much of that is covered by the enterprise fund and how much of that goes directly to the bottom line general fund.
So you have the general fund, yeah, I hear what you're saying, it's not clearly identifiable, I guess.
Sure.
I think it would be
I hear what
based
you're
on, you
saying.
know, how many times, like, if you, for instance, build a big building.
Oh, yeah, I understand that.
you
I'm
know,
just wondering how to understand.
Yeah, see, we do it through position control, and what I mean by that is, so say if I have 2 or 3 different revolving funds or enterprise funds, and my salary's X, and I do 10% of it, you know, of my time is associated with sewers, 5% of it's here, and so on and so forth, you get the picture, then that portion of my salary is allocated to that, and you can see that in the budget, but you're not mapping that together, and you don't see that just looking at the budget numbers, and that's what you're saying.
Yes.
Yeah, and what you'd like to see is, hey, break down, you know, hey, Brian's salary, it's X, and here's where he's being funded from, right? That's kind of a map, if you would.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we can certainly, it's complex, and it may change from year to year as we see changes in programs and allocation of resources internally being shifted around. So,
But when we look at that number per department,
yeah.
Is that bottom line for employees that we're seeing just what goes to the general fund? Or is that inclusive of the various funding resources?
Yeah, so when you're seeing, so if you're going to say a land use division, let's go to Board of Health.
Yeah.
And you're saying 4 FTEs. All those FTEs are in the Board of Health budget, even though some of that expense may be allocated out to some of those revolving or enterprise funds.
Okay, so what I'm seeing is just the budget for that department, but it doesn't all flow down to the general fund budget.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, any other questions from Brian?
More to come next. Oh boy.
Excellent.
Next
Next
meeting.
week. We're meeting back here. Stay tuned. Continuing budget discussions. So, let me address something that came up this week. Our friend Al, who's not here this evening, sent me an email over the weekend, and he has to take leave of absence from the committee.
Oh, no.
So, due to family matters, my thought, I wanted to bring it up to the committee as a discussion under our finance committee business tonight. If we allow, so his basis was, can you allow that? If not, I'll step down type of thing. He could be replaced. He didn't give me an indication of how long this was gonna be. He is an associate. So, I don't know, I'll ask Steve and Mike and what their thoughts are, seeing they've been on the committee the longest. Yeah, I don't see myself as any issue with it because he is an associate member, not a full member. As a full member, it'd be a different story.
Yeah, I mean, he is an associate, so his term expires
At the end of this cycle,
at the
right?
end of this, the cycle.
End of June.
I don't see a problem with having him being carried as an associate while he's on a leave of absence, because, you know, it's a non-voting position, so. So no, I wouldn't see it as a problem.
Yeah, he's great knowledge. Mike, any thoughts on it?
Yeah, I think Al had a lot, he's a smart guy and studious, had a lot to contribute. He was, I think, an excellent liaison with the select board, and I think I would like to give him like the benefit of at least till maybe town meeting. I'd like to keep him on board if it's possible.
Yeah. I'll relay that message to him. The issue now is that we have to reassign
I'll take them.
all the elements.
The last bit is easy. He has the consent articles,
Okay, and then he also
and
has,
then he just has the at least
The
the
deleted
19 to
place.
20 Maple Street.
and we'll give Adam the deleted placeholder.
Sorry, I missed what you said.
You get the deleted placeholder.
Oh,
Wow.
why I don't know.
Okay, so you'll take over, great,
I think
thank
he
you.
can handle it.
Do we wanna have continuing budget, is there any discussions for this evening that anybody wanted to address, or should we just table that till next meeting?
I'd like to raise an idea regarding our budget discussions.
Go ahead.
I had a bit of understanding today, relative to Minuteman. I have been thinking of the cost per student inclusive of the debt. And it hadn't occurred to me that the number we get from the school district is not inclusive of the debt, so I'm very curious to know what the cost per pupil is effectively for Acton at the bottom line.
Inclusive of debt and
Yes,
everything.
because we don't pay $15,000 for each kid we send. We pay a lot more than that,
Right, due to the debt.
especially with the new school building. I'm also especially curious to see the total budgetary breakdown this year. We have our lovely pie chart. Usually Minuteman is a little tiny slice, and we have the school is around 66%. I'm curious to see where that division falls out.
Still gonna be a pretty small slide.
Well, yes, but how much has the school percentage grown with this big building project?
So I'll reach out to Dave Bertolini and see if I can get that number with the debt included. You can bring it to the next meeting?
Great.
All right.
Yeah, I don't know if the slice got any bigger, but the pie got bigger.
That's why I mean, the
Well,
slice,
that's
the
what I'm
slice
curious to
won't
see.
get that much bigger.
Wait, so they get bigger on the page. Okay, so we'll table the rest of the budget discussions until.
Hey, Rose.
Good, Christine. Sorry, Diane? Sure.
I just wanna clarify something.
Excellent.
I took a look in the chart of accounts just to make sure I have given you accurate information on what is excluded from per pupil costs. And there are 9, broad categories in the chart of accounts. It's these for end of year reporting. So one of them is out of district expenses that is excluded. So those are not counted on debt service, CIP, the capital, and something called community services, which is expenses related to PTOs and school councils and such.
Okay, but at the end of the day, for the taxpayers, we get
Yeah.
a big number, and
Yes.
dividing that by our students would be helpful.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thanks, Dan. So that brings us to Finance Committee business. And liaison reports, et cetera. We don't have no minutes this week? We do. Wait, there's more. Come on, Brian. And then you can get into. Good. To board.
The warrant.
Yeah, talk about, okay, whatever you wanna discuss about the warrant. We can go
I
back to
would
that.
love to have an idea who can present their warrant articles next week, since we've added an extra meeting in, we need everything done by the 10th. And I really don't wanna do another, sit there until 10:30 or whatever our horrible last spring was, where we tried to cover as much as possible.
Yeah,
I know with the Enterprise Fund, we don't have the exact numbers yet. I can tell you for Kelly's Corner, they will be presenting next week. I'm happy to take a vote after that. I do not have a stated opinion at this time because we don't know the acquisition cost. I think it's a good overall project that I am in support of, but without knowing the final numbers, I won't have a recommendation for the town. But if anyone is willing to commit to having their stuff ready for next week, it would be wonderful, especially any of these zoning or bylaw questions that don't have numbers that might need to be adjusted.
usually zoning and bylaw don't have any dollar value attached to
Yeah.
them.
Yep.
Brian, question for you. Like, on this, on.
Yeah,
the-
I'm sorry. To be clear, everybody, please try to bring at least one of your articles. That can be talked about and voted about next week.
The draft town meeting warrant, like it was number 1 and then the next one's number 18.
There's a new version.
But that's what they gave us last week.
Yeah, can we get a new copy of the newer
The
version?
new one tonight has,
I didn't
it at least has all the ones
I
that
didn't-
I was missing.
You're the only one that has that.
You're the
Is
only
that
one
the
that
221?
I am?
Yeah.
It was the copy that was sent out to you on Friday.
Yeah, that's the
And I
221
gave
version.
Adam a hard copy because he's not on the FinCom email shell, so I figured everybody got it but him, so I gave him a hard copy. But
That's why I'm special.
I'll take a hard copy. I have a couple of spares here. if anybody
And I
wants it.
appreciate it greatly.
Do you know when the next version will be out?
I can,
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
that's it.
You're not so special anymore.
It's all right. It's all online, right?
Yes,
It's all online.
It's good.
So I think you was sent that email link, it was either Thursday or Friday.
it's from Mark Holt.
Because it went to the Board of
Oh,
Selectmen, I
Mark
think,
Holt,
from
yeah.
Monday evening.
Okay.
So it's
that's helpful.
available on the town website then?
Yes, it is.
Yes.
It is. I can send you the link if it's easier, if you can't, no.
I'm sure I can find
And-
it.
Yeah, the link's in the email from Mark that came in on the 21st.
So not that they're my articles, but is there any reason we couldn't vote the town operating budget, the school budget, and Minuteman
Right now?
next time?
Next time.
No, we should
I
be able
mean,
to.
I think we've got amounts that are pretty well established and not gonna change by very much.
That's true.
And I would see we've heard all the presentations.
Yep.
Is
so
there
I
a
would-
reason to not do it now?
It's not in our
Oh,
agenda
it's
to do
not?
so.
Well, we're
We
doing
can-
budget
To
discussions.
discuss, but not to vote. Does that matter?
Given we're a little short of members tonight, I hate to take up $100 million worth of expenses.
Yeah, I think it'd be better if we do it till when Jason's back next week.
So we need to confirm how many people will be here next week.
Yes. So
Jason will
anybody-
be back. He's stuck in Ohio right now.
So it's Tuesday we're
Find
meeting.
the others.
Next Tuesday, right here, 7:30.
Super Tuesday.
Yes.
And I believe CPC is gonna be coming in to meet with us as well.
We also meeting the 10th?
Yes.
So-
Unless we get it all done.
All the Tuesdays.
So after the CPC gives us their presentation, I would like to be able to take that article up as well.
Yes.
Which
And then
would-
Kelly's Corner's presenting.
Kelly's Corner's presenting too.
It's gonna be a long meeting.
It is gonna be a long meeting. That said, Tom's not gonna be able to be here for that meeting. And,
Is he the one who yelled at us last time?
no, Tom.
Oh, Tom, perfect, gotcha.
That was Walter. And Ray and, you know, I mean,
Thank you.
That's the latest.
Again,
But I figure I'll just give you guys the latest.
thank you.
Thank you.
We do have a set of minutes from January 28th meeting in front of us.
There.
Let's take a quick overview of that.
That's all. Yeah.
Thank you.
Move to approve minutes as minorly amended.
What were the amendments?
There's a was that shouldn't be there, and I asked it to be removed.
Okay. Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion passes. Meeting minutes of January 28th, 2020 are adopted. Thank you. Committee reports. Steve?
Yeah, Health Insurance Trust meets next week.
Sahana? Adam, you're not on the committee yet. We'll get you on that soon. Mike?
Well, Minuteman, I think we just covered everything we need to cover.
Kelly's Corner is, the committee is getting together Thursday night with the immediate neighbors of the Kelly's Corner project, the property owners for the buildings who will be directly affected by the construction, to hear about their concerns and try to work with them on any sort of construction abatement and other things that can happen.
Christine?
There hasn't been any school committee meeting since our last meeting.
So you have another one?
Oh, I just wanted to say, we need someone to attend the Board of Selectmen meetings.
Yes, we do.
I guess that's me.
Can you?
If I can't, I can let you know.
You can also watch them.
Watch
We just
Oh.
need someone to report on them.
I typically do that anyway.
Perfect.
I didn't see last night's, did they publish that?
You missed a good one.
We do have a ALG meeting this Thursday
Thursday
morning
morning.
at the Public Safety Building, 7:30. Christy and I will be in attendance. Mr. Benson,
Yeah,
I think you want to say something.
I do. I can report, the town received some, very good news late yesterday afternoon in the Danny Factor Planning Board litigation. That's the matter of Karen Boutet, Tara Fredericks, and Jeremy Simons versus the Acton Board of Selectmen. We received a 13-page decision from Judge Karen Green of the Middlesex Superior Court. We will be sending the decision out, the full decision out to all boards and committees later this week. The issue before Judge Green was whether, just back up. The select board acknowledged we did violate the open meeting law and that there was a serial communication in the initial hearing, the April 22nd hearing regarding Danny's appointment to the planning board. And we cured that by having a rehearing, redo, 8 days later. Nonetheless, 3 members of the Acton community decided with being represented by Stephen Ballard, brought an action in the Middlesex Superior Court against us. We acknowledged right up front that we did violate the open meeting law, but that it wasn't an intentional violation. So the matter that was tried over 4 days before Judge Green was whether the violation was intentional, and if it was intentional, town be fined anywhere from $0 to $1,000. And in a very comprehensive decision, Judge Green said our violation was not intentional, so therefore there was no fine, and in addition rejected the plaintiff's claims for counsel fees and costs, and a request that the judge appoint Danny Thacker to the planning board. So we were felt very good about that. And Nina Pickering Cook did a very nice job in representing us, and we owe her and John a great deal of thanks. When our original hearing on April 22nd, it wasn't the hearing itself, it was the run-up to the hearing, was off the tracks, that they said, we've got to straighten this out, and we did. And we, essentially what the judge found is you cured the violation as quickly as possible. So that was good. Any questions on that? We'll send out the full text. It's a very well-written decision. It's very easy to read, and she did a really thorough and complete job. You'll get a good sense of what went on.
Great.
Excellent.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Adam?
Your turn.
Your turn.
Oh,
Do your thing.
are we there?
Yes, we're there.
Well, I move we adjourn.
Second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Bye.
Aye.
We're adjourned. We don't have our normal curmudgeon tonight.
I didn't realize